Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Meet a Professor series. We have the immense pleasure of talking with Jaideep today, and he's going to tell us about his life, many interesting stories, and I am told that there is books. Today we don't have a sign-in sheet because I'm going to count you all through email, but make sure to grab coffee and pie and fruits. And with that, I shut up, and thank you so much, Jaideep.
Okay, thank you so much. So my name is Jaideep. My pronouns are he, him, his. Oh, I have a solution to this problem. The laser pointer doesn't work. The batteries are a little low, but I have a thing that's almost exactly the same. I installed fresh batteries. Okay, good. Yeah, so my pronouns are he, him, his. So I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this event. So thank you, Pablo, and the lab that enables this. So this QR code goes to a presentation I wrote about Professor Thelma Irene Arnett. She was actually a third person hired to build the cyclotron lab. So before 1960, there was no nuclear physics at MSU whatsoever. And they hired a young scientist named Henry Blosser, who was an expert at building cyclotrons from Oak Ridge. And he knew he couldn't do it by himself, so he brought two other scientists. One was Morton Gordon. So Henry Blosser and Morton Gordon became very famous university distinguished professors, won all the awards, and they'll be remembered forever. The second person he brought with him, because he knew he needed the help, and in particular, computational help. These are very complicated cyclotron designs. He needed a programmer who could simulate this stuff. And that was Professor Thelma Irene Arnett. She is basically completely forgotten by the lab. No one remembers who she is. The old timers, when I ask them about her, they uncomfortably decide not to answer questions about her. And so I tell her life story up till the point she got to the lab. Actually, I don't have any information after that. But just recently, a couple of weeks ago, I got a fellowship to actually study her history and her contributions to MSU. So this is a little bit of her life story. So I've sort of moved around quite a bit. I was born in New Delhi, but then soon after I was born, I moved to a place called Shillong in eastern part of India, near a state called Assam. If you've heard of Assam, it's usually because you get tea from there. And then when we were very young, we moved to Waterloo, Canada, which is like right here. You could say it's a far suburb of Toronto. It's kind of interesting that I ended up back in the East Lansing area. It's only 247 miles from where I grew up in Canada. And then I mostly grew up in West Texas, a place called Lubbock, Texas. There's sort of three famous things about Lubbock, Texas. The first one is the greatest women's basketball player of all time, Cheryl Swoops. Grew up around here and went to school at Texas Tech. I got to watch her play in high school. It was amazing. Some people think it's Caitlin Clark, but we'll get back to that. The second interesting thing is Buddy Holly was a famous musician in the 1950s. He actually went to my high school. His desk and report card are in a display in my high school, along with him dropping out because he became a very famous rock musician, didn't need high school. And the third thing is Lubbock is in a part of, it's a part of a district and that is represented in the House of Representatives in the US federal government. And that was the only political race George W. Bush ever lost as an entire life. And the way he lost was his opponent painted him as an out-of-touch East Coast liberal because George W. Bush went to Yale for college. And yeah. So so maybe some of you don't remember George W. Bush, but if you do, it's actually very funny. That's the way he lost his only political race. And that was to represent the district where I grew up in. And then I'll sort of get to the rest of the story later. But first, I wanted to get a sense for who all of you are. So who is studying in the subfield of nuclear structure? Okay, that's good. How about nuclear astrophysics? It's a good representation there. Okay, maybe, yeah. How about fundamental symmetries? See, just mostly my group members and that guy. All right. And then radiochemistry? No radiochemists. That's too bad. Radiochemists are some of my favorite people. Accelerator science? Oh, we have a few in the back. Awesome. We appreciate you. We can't do any of this without you guys. And then anything I didn't cover. Pablo, uncertainty quantification. Yeah, good. That's very important. It's the only thing that makes theorists useful. Sorry, I will explain where that nasty comment came from in a second. Okay, so what kind of techniques are you learning? Anyone doing theory? It's okay to raise your hand. I won't make fun of you too much. Okay, experiment. Very good. How about both? Yeah, okay, Nick. Yeah, you're doing calculations. That counts. Okay, so what are your long-term career goals? If you don't know, raise your hand. Okay, it's all good. Perfectly fine place to be. Industry? Okay, you got one. So we're actually, I don't know if you know this, we're working very hard in the lab to figure out how to support students that want to go into industry. Actually, most of our students go to industry. And at some point, the decision is made, I don't know when it's going to happen. A decision is made by the lab to actually hire a career person. And the career person will interact with our vast network of alumni and actually help you with various career-related things, applying for jobs, writing CVs, resumes, cover letters. Those three things are three different things, in case you didn't know. And so this person will show up at some point. The search is going to happen because we have to do a better job in the lab to support our students, regardless of their long-term career aspirations. So that's coming. So please be patient. Okay, how about the national labs? Okay, good. Anyone want to go into academia? Excellent, very good. Okay, and then this one is a little complicated. You don't actually have to answer this one out loud, but just think to yourself, you feel like you belong here. Okay, and this is sort of an important question. And I will say, for most of my career, I always felt like an outsider and I didn't belong here. And only now, after being at the lab for 10 years, do I feel a modicum of appreciation and happiness that other faculty members are glad I'm here. So it takes a long time. But the feeling of belonging is sort of a two-way street. The people where you're at have to be accepting and inclusive. And then you might have some preconceived notions of your own that sometimes you have to fight against. And it's very much a two-way street. I think the burden is on the people that are at the place and you're new to it. Okay, so I think about that a lot. But don't worry, you do belong here, even the theorists. Okay, so I like to describe my life as an ongoing chain of happy coincidences. So this is my dad, this is my mom. They were both first-generation college students. And actually, amazingly, they both went on to get advanced degrees. My dad got a PhD in condensed matter theory from the University of Pittsburgh in the 1970s. So if you know anything about my sports affiliations, it's 100% Pittsburgh Steelers. My dad was in Pittsburgh in the 1970s. And if you don't know, the Pittsburgh Steelers were winning the Super Bowl every year that decade. And so that was an amazing time before I was born, but I was raised to love the Steelers, regardless of the sport that was on TV. And then this is my mom. She got her master's in history. She actually wanted to be an independent woman. She was not really interested in getting married. But because of societal and cultural norms, that just wasn't an option for her. That is now, but not back then. So my mom very begrudgingly decided to get married. Back then in India, it was very common, almost exclusively common, to have an arranged marriage. So that's how my mom and dad met. It was through family members. They had an arranged marriage. They're actually each other's second choice. The first choice didn't work out for both of them for interesting reasons. And so by total dumb luck, they decided, just on a lark, let's go down the list and see if the other person is still unattached. And they were. And so they decided to get married. So they had known each other for a total of 2 hours before they decided to get married. And so that actually has given me a broader perspective on, you know, um, ideas of how you go about meeting another person if that's of interest to you. So I definitely feel like I'm a happy coincidence. Another thing is my dad was actually born in Pakistan while it was still a part of India. And he was born the year before partition. If you don't know what partition is, it was a historical event where some British bureaucrats decided that because of religious reasons, they had to split India into 2 different countries, one for the Muslims, one for the Hindus and everybody else. So they just drew a line, not worrying about anything. It was purely an academic matter to them. And so they drew a line, and my dad happened to be on the Pakistan side, and he was not of the right religion. And so there was, because of the poor way this political event happened, there was a lot of religious violence. And so my dad and my grandfather barely escaped. In fact, they were supposed to be on a train to India. They missed that train, and actually many people on that train died because of religious violence. So actually my dad and my grandfather made it across the border by foot and by rickshaw. Uh, and so he sort of barely survived. Um, but the neighbors were great. They actually kept all his stuff. And so they actually emailed my dad recently saying, hey, we've been holding all to your dad's and your family's stuff since 1946. Do you still want this stuff? My dad's kind of interesting guy. He's very terse. He's just like, oh, nah, we're good. You know, he could have said, thank you for holding on to our stuff. Tell us about your life story. It's so awesome that you were so nice to us. He didn't say any of those things. He was like, yeah, I don't need that shit. Don't email me again. So this is, we didn't have much money growing up. So this was, this family lore says this is my favorite toy. It's an empty can. Actually, it didn't even have anything inside. And I just loved playing with this can. To this day, I miss this can. My son actually has a penguin that's like their favorite stuffed animal. At the age of 8, they still go everywhere with it. And if we ever lose that penguin, oh my God, my life is fucking over. I mean, my son's going to be inconsolable. It's just going to be terrible. So just as a hint, if you have a family member that likes a thing, get 2 of them and hide one of them, okay? Because if you lose it, you always have a backup. This is my grandfather's sister. So my dad's mom passed away when she was young. My grandfather's younger sister actually helped raise him, and also me. So that's a picture of me. And so here I have a gratitude next to this picture. So she was an amazing woman, did many, many things. Again, according to family lore, she taught me when I was very young not to eat my own poop. Now, in my defense, I want to explain, I understood that if somebody else pooped, it belonged to them. Okay. Really, the question was, what about my own poop? I felt like I made it. I did all the work. It should be for me. And she's like, hey, maybe you shouldn't eat that. And I listened to her, and that's like one of the many lessons I got from her. So here's your homework, okay? So she died before I could thank her. This is also part of family lore. So your homework for you is to thank someone this week. Here's a book on how to write handwritten notes, and here are some instructions. I sent Pablo the slides so you can look at it, so you have very clear instructions on how you can do that. Okay, so here are some of my favorite people. So this is my son, Benjamin. This is my wife, Libby. So my wife hates this picture, but I love it because I'm a scientist. And I tell my students, if you show a photograph, you got to include something for scale. Otherwise, a photograph contains almost no information, okay? So here, it's a little bit hard to see. That's my son. They were a week old. This is all the poop they created in that first week, okay? And so that's baby for scale. Okay, my wife hates this picture. So my son's pronouns are they, them. We actually, when we went to the DNP conference, did anyone have a chance to go to DNP Hawaii last fall? A few of you. So this rotates to Hawaii every 4-ish years. So if you haven't gone yet, don't worry. Sometime when you're close to graduation, there'll be another opportunity, and you should definitely try to go. It's awesome. We wouldn't be able to afford to go otherwise, but since it was a professional thing, we were able to go. My son loves animals, just like their favorite thing. Wants to be a zoologist when they grew up. And so I was like super excited because this hotel had what they call the dolphin experience. And I paid for the whole thing, $500, every single thing. And so that's and so you get to play with a dolphin. Dolphins are amazing. They're like brilliant creatures. They're awesome. They really can understand. They have a lot of emotional intelligence. They can understand humans really well. They're just these beautiful, majestic creatures. And if you look at the waterways there, you can tell there's something off the screen. And if you look really carefully, right there, it's just the edge of the fin of the dolphin. That is as close as my son got to the dolphin, because my son is terrified of animals. And so I think what's going to happen is that maybe zoology is not the best career choice. Maybe my son will be a theoretical zoologist. And I guess it just sort of skips a generation. Okay, by the way, my father, like I said, is a theorist. That makes me half theorist. That means I'm allowed to make fun of theorists. Okay. This is, sorry? A theoretical zoologist, a paleontologist. That's true. They're dead. So maybe that'll work. Yeah. Well, thanks for the insight. So my wife's from West Des Moines, Iowa. She's an artist, and she grew up in the home of Caitlin Clark. So she thinks Caitlin Clark is the greatest women's basketball player. I think that might be true for college, but she's still working on her career. She's young in her career. Sheryl Swoopes won everything. She won the national championship. She was player of the year. She won a gold medal. She was the first woman to get her own shoe by Nike. She won many professional championships in the WNBA. She's in the WNBA Hall of Fame. She even played against Michael Jordan. Sheryl Swoopes is amazing. This is something that my wife and I like to argue about, because her hometown is Caitlin Clark. So we're still working that out. There's a picture of my mom, and me and my mom and my son. We're sort of the same. We're almost the same age in these two pictures. So the second picture was taken on purpose. Okay, so outside of work, a lot of my time is devoted to family stuff, and so I don't like to make small talk, and my son doesn't like to talk at dinner. So we have a new game. We have these cards called Better Than Small Talk cards. You can get them online from Kat Velas's website. And so instead of saying, well, how's the weather? What'd you do today? They have like very deep questions on a variety of topics. And so we pick one of these and we talk about it at dinner. When we have a dinner guest come over, that's what we talk about. And this is sort of a relatively new thing for me. I'm going to start incorporating this into my group meetings. And then there's a game called Hanabi. It was Game of the Year in 2013. And it's really good for building your communication skills. If you want to become better at communication and negotiation, one of the key things you have to realize is that you have to understand the other person's perspective. You're not born understanding, knowing how to do that. It's a skill like anything else that you can learn. And so you want to practice before you're in a high pressure situation where you have to have a difficult conversation or when you have to have a tense negotiation. And so you want to practice. And so Hanabi is a great way to do that. And if you read about the game and see the rules of the game, you'll understand why I say that. It's very sad to report the family's favorite TV show is called The Bachelorette. Some of you might know about this show. It's been on air for 20 years. It is possibly the most sexist and racist show on TV. They just recently discovered that Black people existed and might need love. And then actually this first season, they just have an Asian woman who's like the Bachelorette. But when I was trying to woo my wife, one of the things I had to do was to watch this show with her. And so now it's just part of the family tradition. I think a better TV show that actually gives you more skills is this show called Ted Lasso. It's on Apple TV. It's too hard to describe the show, but one of the famous quotes from the show is, "You should be curious and not judgmental." Okay, so that's some background. Let me give you a little bit of my academic background. So I went to college out in California. There, I learned humility, and I worked 3 jobs. It was an expensive college. We couldn't afford it, so I had to work 3 jobs. I was a server 5 days a week. I served dinner to the other undergraduate students. I was a short order cook on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night from 8 at night to 2 in the morning. I think I hated the most about that job was this one guy would show up right before closing, and he would want 1 strip of bacon for dinner at 1 o'clock in the morning. And I don't know if you've ever cooked bacon, but as soon as you cook bacon, you smell like bacon the whole weekend. It's awful. And I'm vegetarian, so it sucked. Anyway, so I did that all 4 years in college. But luckily, for the rest of my time, I was able to get involved in undergraduate research, and that's kind of what launched my career. And then I went to the University of Virginia, and after 10 years, they kicked me out. I used to think I had a terrible advisor, but now I've had a chance to run my own research group, and I have like a different perspective on my advisor. And what I realized was that he had a very fixed mindset, and if you came to him with a problem, he would go to his toolbox, and if he had the right tool, and his most common tools he used was patience and independence, then he applied that tool to the problem. If the problem didn't fit within his toolbox, he didn't think of it as an opportunity to grow and learn a new tool. He would just say to me, hey, once you figure that out, let me know how it worked out. Good luck, buddy. And so that, yeah, so I did 10 years of that. And then I got to Argonne National Lab in Chicago. I think the most important thing well, actually many things, sort of many threads of my career sort of came together there. So that's where I met my cat. And then my wife, in that order. I still have them both. Just a little surprising for different reasons. And there, actually, the other thing is at Argonne, I learned some of the unwritten rules for building a scientific career. So there's a lot. You're happy to answer any questions, but I brought everyone a book. It's called The PhD is Not Enough. And it's in the back. You can grab one. It's free for yours to keep. And it actually asks a lot of interesting questions about how you build a scientific career. And the guy who wrote the book is very, very opinionated and sometimes wrong. So I don't agree with everything he says, but I appreciate the stories that he brings up, and he appreciates it makes you ask questions. That's the value of the book. And then sometimes I think he gets it right, sometimes he gets it wrong. And if you read the book and you have some questions about it, I'm happy to chat about it. So then I did a postdoc at the Technical University of Munich. And there I developed a tremendous amount of empathy for international researchers. It is really hard. I mean, you go somewhere else, you don't know the language, you don't know the system, you don't know how to get healthcare, you can't find an apartment, you don't know where the grocery store is, you don't know the conventions of the grocery store, you don't know anything about tipping, you don't understand anything about the culture. I just went there for the science, and I actually got an education, all those other things. And so I have a much deeper appreciation for how brave you have to be to leave your home country and go somewhere else just to do science. Okay, so one of my favorite sayings is failure is a gift. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yes, I will. I'll talk about that. Yeah, okay. Oh, so you guys are paying attention. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So one of my favorite sayings is failure is a gift. There's a thing called growth mindset, which is in opposition to fixed mindset, which is a way you can think about how you respond to failure. And so there's a nice chart here. The scientist who developed all this stuff has a very nice book called Mindset. It's by Carol Dweck. If you don't want to read the book, there's lots of YouTube videos. There's even graphics, so you don't have to look at the video. But here's a list, incomplete but ongoing list of my failures. I had a 2.94 GPA in college. The 4 is important because I couldn't round it up to a 3. Okay, that actually automatically, by default, excludes you for lots of things, fellowships, grad school, whatever. People will see that GPA 2.9, they'll just throw your application up. They won't even look at it. Okay. And so I was actually 1 for 9 in grad school applications. So when I was in college, I didn't get in anywhere. And through a personal connection of my boss, my undergraduate advisor to the person who became my graduate advisor, through a weird connection between them, I was able to get a job at the University of Virginia, which turned into grad school. When I applied for jobs, I was 1 for 25 in job applications. That includes everything: jobs in industry, jobs in academia, just any job. You'll note I met my wife in Chicago. As soon as I met her, I moved as far away as possible to Germany. My desire at that point was just to be in the same country as my then girlfriend, now wife. And so I was applying for everything. 1 for 25. The good news is the 24 failures kind of don't matter. It's just the one that you get, which was my job here. So I'm super grateful for that. And once I was a junior professor, actually even now, in the last 10 years, I've applied for 24 grants. That's 2.4 grants a year. Okay. And I have gotten 8 of them, and some are big, some are small. Here's the thing, that 8 out of 24, for if you're a junior faculty, that's considered spectacularly successful. And the only reason I got tenure is because I got 8 out of 24 grants. Because we didn't have a publication record, I didn't have students graduated just yet. And I wasn't a very good instructor at the time. I was still learning. Actually, I'm still learning. So my student, so I don't know, you do these student evaluation. I don't know if you know how they're used. You do these student evaluations. There's an anonymous section in the student evaluations where you can write anything, totally anonymous. That goes to a database. When you go off for tenure, the review committee reads all of those comments. Now, interestingly, if you love the class, you just rank 5s on everything. And maybe you might say like, oh, this is a cool class. That's it. If you have a good experience in a class, psychologically, you don't have a burning desire to write awesome things about the instructor in the class. Okay, now, if you don't click with a student or you're still learning how to teach a class and they write terrible things about you, and statistically, I can tell you about 10% of my students always hate me. Doesn't matter what I do, okay? Just 10% hate me. Okay, and you teach classes for 7 years, that's a lot of students, that's a lot of negative comments, and that is the only thing the tenure review committee reads, okay? Luckily, I'm a man, so the comments were not so bad. If you're a woman, they're way worse. This is known by the university, and they've completely changed how they do the student evaluation system. Okay, I failed one of my graduate students. In retrospect, now that I'm a better mentor, I realized I did everything wrong. They're one of my first graduate students. And I continue to this day, feel deeply sad about it, but they landed on their feet, so it worked out. I currently, actually, this is a lie. I don't have 9,129 unanswered emails. I actually have 9,132 unanswered emails. I have 3 overdue important review articles. I have 7 unpublished papers from our group's research going back at least 5 or 6 years. I have 3 expired FRIB trainings, 2 semesters worth of laundry. And one of the unanswered emails I got was from lab management saying, hey, you are chair of the seminar committee. We have noticed you have scheduled exactly 0 seminars for the fall semester. So after this discussion, I know what I'm going to be doing. Okay, now, so when you see all these things, if you see somebody and you think, oh, they have a nice job, and you think, oh, they must have a straight line and success, it's a story's always complicated. That's why I appreciate these meet the professor things. I watched the video for Artemis and Alyssa, and I don't know if was anyone there for those talks. Okay, yeah. So I'll just briefly summarize what I got from those talks. I had to work hard, but then I got lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. I applied for one faculty position just a few years after I got my PhD, and I got the job. Yay! Everything's awesome. Okay, that was not my path. Okay, I'm older than Artemis, and she's already a full professor. Okay, so you really can't compare your trajectory with somebody else's. And Alyssa, by the time she's my age, she's going to be a distinguished university named professor because she is amazing. Okay, and I just barely got done with the tenure process. Okay, now how you respond to if you fail, that's fine, that happens. Really, the thing is how you respond. And so I genuinely believe everything is a learnable skill. Okay, but that's not a naive statement. Okay, you need a growth mindset. You can read about it in this book. You need a well-defined and realistic goal. You need the time and opportunity to fail and try again. You need a safe space to practice. You need a set, more than one, of patient coaches and mentors. You need the capacity to forgive yourself. But here, really important thing, some people forget about this last part. You need to have the willingness to take responsibility for your actions, okay? If you make a mistake, that's fine. If you do it again, that's bad, okay? You got to take the willingness to get better at everything. Okay, one of the things I try to emphasize in my group, I don't know if I do a good job, is having a thriving social health. So my other job is to be a volunteer for NAMI Lansing. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They do advocacy for people with mental health issues and for the families that support them. They provide education and support. The advocacy happens on a national level. Education sort of happens on a state level. Support level happens in different cities and the local affiliates, and that's what I participate in. So we had a fundraising benefit recently. We were actually named by the national organization, NAMI Lansing, as the Outstanding Affiliate of the Year last year, something we're very proud of. We're a total volunteer organization. We don't have a single paid employee. And so everything we do out of a strong desire to help. But we still need money to like do events and stuff. So we had a fundraising benefit. And this is not my wife. This is MSU women's basketball head coach Robin Freilick. So she agreed to be our guest of honor. Because she was there, we raised $20,000 for our organization. That allows us to do a variety of things. So the things that I personally need to do to have a thriving social health, this is sort of in order of importance. I protect my sleep. So if I have a really important thing, a student needs me to send a letter of recommendation and it's due at midnight and it's 10 o'clock at night, what do you think I do? Go to sleep. That's right. All right. So one thing you should know is some deadlines are real and some are not. If you're a student and you see that somebody you've asked for a letter of recommendation for hasn't submitted it yet, it doesn't mean it's not going to work out, okay? Because there are unwritten rules. Typically, you know the people, and just a phone call can be all that's needed, okay? But you don't know that, so you're freaking out. I can tell you from the other side, it's not so bad. Okay, so I have monthly check-ins with a mental health professional, sometimes two. I take 2 daily medications for anxiety. So I kind of always had it, but when I became a junior professor, it became extremely exacerbated to the point where I got to the end of the semester. I stayed up an entire week writing a grant proposal because I felt a lot of pressure to get it in. And then I just couldn't teach my class. I totally broke down. And that had a lot of long-term consequences. So one was I actually had to get another professor in the department to teach for me. So he actually double taught for 2 weeks because I just couldn't show up to my class anymore. And then it took me a while to figure out how to get support from a mental health professional. That was a very long and challenging process. We didn't have the kind of support in the lab now that we did back then. So I actually really appreciate a lot of the stuff that Rachel and Rachel's group does. And I have to take 2 daily medications for anxiety. One's actually an antipsychotic. I have a daily meditation, weekly gratitude, and I choose real life over social media. So these books actually have a lot of interesting information. So this one is called The Good Life. It actually tells you sort of what's needed. And then the art and so it's, the answer is relationships, basically. And the art and science of connection tells you about, how you can, sort of the science and art of how you make relationships and connections. And then this book is sort of like a how-to guide. And if you look at the publication dates, these all came out in the last 2 years. So I'm still learning about this stuff. Okay, so I have a few more slides. I strongly believe early career researchers should receive a yearly cost of living adjustment and a living wage. The Department of Energy, this is actually from a solicitation, Department of Energy says, they define for graduate students, Office of Science considers a reasonable living wage to be an annual income of $45,000, excluding benefits. That's a totally context-free number, okay? So you can follow this QR code to an MIT website, and that tells you, you can put in facts about yourself, and it'll tell you what's considered a living wage where you live and your family circumstance. And then in the most recent long-range plan for nuclear science, it actually included this statement, raising the compensation of graduate researchers to levels commensurate with their cost of living without contraction of the workforce, lowering barriers and expanding opportunities for all, and so boosting national competitiveness. So this statement actually was never in the long-range plan. There were a lot of people that fought to get this in there, including a professor at George Washington University named Evie Downey. She is my hero. She worked really hard because, scientists have a lot of different political beliefs. And so she actually got data from a variety of schools and actually did a cost of living adjustment saying, hey, when you were a graduate student, this is what your salary would be today. Okay, and if you look at it, it's just been going down. Okay, and so she got that data. And when she showed people that data, they said, okay, regardless of our particular views, political views, we have to include a statement, and this is what they came up with. So it's a very complicated issue. So there's two things you can do. Talk to your PIs and just ask them how far their stipend went when they were young. And this is an interesting conversation. So I've done this, and they're like, oh, my family could pay for daycare. I save money for retirement, and all this stuff. This was like in the early 80s. And I'm like, oh, okay. And, just ask them how far their stipend went. And hopefully they might be somewhat curious and not judgmental. And they might ask you, well, how far does it go for you? Okay, so first step is just understanding that there might potentially be a problem. And then if you're an early career researcher, it's a complicated thing, but I would just say consider joining or forming a union. That's one of many different ways that the system can change. But I can tell you one thing: if you do nothing, nothing will change. Okay? Now, something has to happen. This might be a way to go. So I just have two quick slides on the research, which is sort of the most boring thing of what I do. So the scientific question that our group is mostly interested is, why is there something rather than nothing? And more specifically, this, in my view, is the most beautiful data ever taken in the history of science. This is called the cosmic microwave background anisotropy. How they took this data, what it means, is very complicated. But what I can tell you is, you see these dots that are different colors. These dots have different sizes and different colors. And if you characterize the size and color of and distribution of these dots, you can answer a lot of questions about the large-scale structure of the universe. For example, you could quantify how much more matter than antimatter is there in the visible universe. It doesn't say anything about dark matter or dark energy compared to the amount of light left over from the Big Bang. It's amazing to me we can ask and scientifically answer this question under some model-dependent assumptions, but you get this number. Okay, this is almost zero. This is like 8 zeros. And then there's a slight accidental imperfection, which, from a philosophical point of view, I love. I feel like my whole life is a series of happy coincidences. The fact that we exist is a happy coincidence. I also really think that there's beauty in imperfection. And if this was not exactly zero, the fact that this number is slightly imperfect is also the reason we exist. Okay, there are a lot of interesting ways to try to answer this question, but one of the ways that my group is really keen on is using radioactive molecules containing pear-shaped nuclei. And a lot of interesting reasons why that's exciting. This is a lifetime's worth of work. And so this is sort of what my whole career is dedicated towards. I genuinely believe there will be a major Nobel Prize winning discovery in this field, and it'll probably be the cousin of a student of one of my students' postdoc's brother. Okay, sometime maybe 50 years in the future. But on paper, it looks great. It's just going to be really hard to get there. And so that's kind of what we're focusing on. And I should mention that Professor Singh was hired to do similar things in a different way. And that's sort of the big picture. My dad is retired now. He had sort of an interesting career trajectory, which I can talk about. He's not a scientist anymore. He writes biographies of obscure people in the Indian film industry who lived in the 1950s and 60s. He's written over 100 biographies, and so a lot of that information is here. If you want to learn more about the group and also some more background about the science of our research, I actually just did a National Nuclear Physics summer school. I gave some lectures there, and the links are here. Happy to answer whatever questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Jaideep. Now we're going to transition for around 15 minutes of questions, and make sure that when you ask your question, I have the microphone with you. By the way, as usual, the rules are, if you want to ask something and you don't want that something to be put in the video afterwards, you just tell me and I edit that part out. It's extremely easy, barely an inconvenience. What is your first question?
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. On your slide about your education, you talked about how your undergrad taught you humility. Could you talk a little more about that?
Oh yeah. So So I did pretty well in high school, just high school. In junior high, I almost failed out. My dad one day had to go in 8th grade. I was failing math, science, and French. And my dad actually had to go to the school and talk to the school counselor and the teacher. And all three of them didn't know that they had an appointment that day with my dad. That was not a good conversation with my dad when I got home that day. And so I realized, like, okay, school is important. I should put some effort into school. So I put a lot of effort into school from grades 9 through 12 and not since. And that ended up being very useful. So I competed in competitions in high school, and I actually am very proud of this, but everyone tells me it's not something you should show off. So Texas is a big state. Okay, I was the Texas State calculator competition, calculator champion, and I am super proud of that. And my wife just laughs endlessly about that. She's like, "Why would you openly tell people you're a Texas State calculator champion?" Because I'm like, "Look, Texas, big state. It's a big deal to be Texas State calculator champion." And so I was lucky enough to get into Caltech, which is a very competitive school in the U.S. So when I went there, I thought, I just was going to continue being awesome. I was going to triple major in physics, math, and computer science. And oh my God, that was a stupid idea. I got crushed. And I failed. I failed my first, I think I failed the class every semester I was there, which was actually pretty bad, because if you fail a class, you don't get the credits for it. I had to take extra classes to take the minimum amount of credits just to be eligible to graduate from college. And in my junior year, I sort of hit the very bottom, and I actually was failing so many of my classes. I was automatically academically ineligible to be a student in college. But I knew the dean, the assistant dean, and she knew me. And so she just went to the meeting where I had to plead my case. And she went to the meeting and said, "Oh, I know this guy. He'll turn it around. It's fine." So they just let me back in. And then she came out of the conference room and said, "Oh, hey, Jaideep, I talked to him. It's fine. Just, hey, maybe you should study a little bit more." I'm like, "Okay, yes, thank you." So I definitely thought I was hot when I went to college. And I remember the dean at the university at the time said, "You all are probably think you're very good math and science students, but you should know you're at Caltech now. Half of you are below average." And I remember looking around at the audience like, "Look at those assholes." uh, and the dean, so the assistant dean was a really amazing woman. She was super nice, and she saved me so many times for all sorts of different problems. But she was also very honest, and she said, "Jaideep, you're very lucky you managed to graduate college. I had to take like 3 PEs my last semester senior year just to have enough credits to graduate, and I luckily passed PE." She told me there was about 32 physics majors, and I was the bottom of my class in college. And I don't know why, but she thought it was important that I knew that. Which I guess it makes for a good story now. I kind of landed on my feet. By the way, all the other people, they're like named professors and directors of quantum institutes. And like one guy actually runs like the Mars program. The people who did well at Caltech did really, really well. But I will say just the mere fact that I went there opened a lot of doors for me. But yeah, I learned humility pretty quickly. And it wasn't a lesson I learned once. Every semester, I was like, "Oh, I understand what humility feels like now." It's like, "Nope, I do not. Now I know what it feels like." And that went on for 4 years.
Excellent question. And on my way.
So I was interested in the project you're doing with Thelma Irene Arnett.
Professor Arnett, yeah.
Yeah. So what kind of does the research you're doing with this entail, and like what are you gonna do with the fellowship that you got to research it? Also, are you like collaborating with other scientists or
Yeah, so okay, that's a
people
good question. So up to now, I haven't had the means to go anywhere to do research on her. And so she grew up in the Knoxville area. She went to University of Tennessee. She actually worked on the Manhattan Bomb Project at Oak Ridge, but she actually did like real technical work. And it was all classified. And then later on, that work was unclassified. And so you can actually find that information online through a Google search. And some of that unclassified information was published. She was never made an author on any of those publications. She was always, they put in the acknowledgments, we'd like to thank Miss Arnett for building the experiment, taking the data, analyzing the data, writing computer programs to do a certainty quantification. Thanks for all that. Okay, now, if you did all that right now, you get a PhD in physics. Okay, she got an acknowledgement sometimes in these papers. So I was just, right now it's just been digging up whatever I can find online. Now that I have the fellowship, I can actually go to Oak Ridge. I have got a contact with the archivist there. Through a variety of means, I found her pastor. So I'm going to go to the church where she was very heavily involved in. So she retired in 1986, moved back to the Knoxville area, and was very active in the church. So a lot of people actually know her post-retirement. So I'm going to talk to her pastor and actually give my presentation there. It'll probably be in a church, so I probably won't curse. And hopefully people will tell me stories about her. The work here, that's going to be really challenging. The MSU Archives has a folder with her name on it, and it's empty except for this one photograph. That's it. And a lot of the records in the physics department have been thrown out. I was able to find some old documents here just by searching online, but I'm hoping that I can learn some of the tools and techniques that people who do this kind of archaeology do. And then my goal is to create like an exhibit of her work that will be displayed at the library. But I want it to be sort of accessible, so that I'm going to collaborate with an artist on how to make it visually accessible. And then eventually, my hope is that if people at the lab see how cool it is, they will, it'll have a permanent home here at the lab. But the old timers refused to talk to me about her. In fact, I actually went to the university library, and they actually have the phone books from going back till 1920 something. Those phone books were weird, by the way. They cost a nickel. Okay, and in the phone book, you had the person's work number, work address, work office number, home phone number, home address, and a little asterisk indicating whether they were married or not. I don't think you could do that now. But apparently in the 50s and 60s, that was totally okay. And so she didn't have an asterisk next to her name. So that's actually a useful piece of information. I also found that she lived next to some of the old timers in the physics department. I know that she shared an office right next to one of the old timers at the lab. And all those people refused to talk to me about her. They don't know I know this information. So I'm still trying to figure out how to have that conversation. Hopefully I can learn that via the fellowship. Yep.
PhD students?
Well, that's the interesting thing. She was the first tenured woman physics professor at the university. This is a matter of record. She had no students. She taught some classes. In sort of the early 70s, she was kind of pushed out of the lab into Lyman Briggs College. Lyman Briggs was founded in like 1970 or something, so she kind of taught there. But she had no students. But if you read the theses, the dissertations of early MSU nuclear physics students, she's sort of the queen of acknowledgments. In those acknowledgments, they say, oh, we'd like to thank Miss Arnett, not Professor Arnett, but Miss Arnett for writing the computer code that helped me do some analysis for my thesis project. So, she is acknowledged, but yeah, she's basically willfully, I think, forgotten. Yeah. Oh, and she didn't have as far as I could tell, she didn't have a family. She had two sisters. One died at birth. The other sister also worked on the Manhattan Project as a mathematician. As far as I can tell, neither of them married. So their family line is sort of ended. So I feel doubly responsible to sort of keep her memory alive.
Have you found any of the code that she wrote?
I'm desperately trying to find the code that she wrote. It's code that was written for like a very special computer built for just that purpose back in the 1950s. I do know there is a code that's still used to model the cyclotrons that were initially developed at the lab. And if you follow the intellectual history of that code, it actually goes back to her. So she was the first author. But I've reached out to all these people saying, hey, do you know anything about her? Do you have the code? Do you have anything? And it's all kind of lost for now.
What was your reason in triple majoring?
What was my reason?
Yeah.
Because that was awesome. I didn't know what my career was going to be, but I thought, okay, I like math and science and computer science, and I wanted the challenge. I thought I could do it, and then I thought it would give me a lot of career options, so I didn't have to decide right away. And those are maybe, I don't know, maybe they were good reasons. I don't know, but that didn't last very long. I got that beaten out of me very quickly. I barely survived with one major. Physics, yeah.
Can you talk about how you first started to get interest in research and how your undergrad experience affect,
Oh
your
yeah.
research career?
So again, just a happy coincidence. My first year in college, I was just barely trying to survive. So I didn't think I had any time to do undergraduate research. And then my second year, I remember it was February, I was brushing my teeth, and one of my classmates, she was a year ahead of me, she came to my dorm and she said, hey, are you a physics major? I'm like, yes, I am. She said, oh, the guy who's teaching our physics class that I'm the ombuds person for, he says he's looking for an undergraduate to do research in his group. You should reach out to him. He's a pretty nice guy. Okay. Well, there's a whole bunch of stories about him, but anyway, and so I was like, okay. So I emailed the guy, met with his whole group, and they kept on asking me all these technical questions like, can you do this? Can you solve this problem? Can you do this? I couldn't do any of it. And at the very end, he just smiled and said, great, you haven't learned any bad habits. We can teach you all this stuff. When can you start? And so they were awesome. I mean, it was an amazing experience. I really enjoyed it. They trained me for a few months, and then all of them left for the summer to go work at a lab in Virginia called Jefferson Lab. And they had me do things in the lab that they desperately needed. So I would fix some equipment. I would ship it out to them that summer. I remember being on the phone call with them, like, till 2 or 3 in the morning. They'd be like, hey, this thing, because they were running an experiment at Jefferson Lab. They were like, oh, this thing broke, this laser broke. Can you fix the one in the lab and ship it out to us? And so I would do it that night. First thing in the morning, I'd go to FedEx and I'd ship it out. And they didn't have a choice as to whether they should trust me or not, because they were desperate, because things were, just going terribly with the experiment at Jefferson Lab. And I don't know that they thought they had trained me enough, but I figured it out on my own. So after that, they gave me a lot of responsibility. And so I got to do a lot of cool things in undergrad. So I stayed with that group all the way through college. So 3.5 years. And it's the connections I made through working with them that still benefit my career to this day.
I have one question, Jaideep, and after that we close. While you were in grad school, on those 10 years of grad school, was there a moment that you were like, yeah, I'm not going to go through this. This is way too complicated?
Oh, yeah, every year.
Every year?
Yeah.
Do you remember one in particular that you want to share?
Oh, there's so many. So my thesis experiment was cursed, and so many things went wrong. Like, people literally died during my experiment, and it required a magnet that was superconducting, and it was delayed by like 7 years. And so when it finally came, I was like, oh, I guess I'll do my experiment with this thing, and they miswired the magnet. And instead of giving you a nice dipole field, it gave a quadrupole field. And so it was just acting like garbage. And I remember stayed up all night trying to figure out what was wrong with the magnet. And then we had this theory, and then to actually test it, they actually had to open it up and look inside of it. That happened months later, and they confirmed it was miswired. But all my thesis data was garbage. And I remember actually in the counting house, we were having a conversation with the PIs for the experiment and the spokespeople for the experiment. And they said, well, do we keep taking data with the magnet, or do we stop and give someone else a turn? Maybe we won't get a chance to get data again. And they said, I remember they just looked at the graduate students and they said, oh, you guys are under a lot of pressure now. You're going to have to figure out how to analyze this data so we can get physics out of it. We were not given a choice. We were just told that's what was going to happen. And I was infuriated, and I was like, man, I'm leaving. My advisor had to walk me off the ledge many, many times. I thought it was really unfair to put that on a graduate student. So that was just, one example. I think 8 years in, I burned out. So like every Friday, I would just start drinking at noon till midnight. I remember the postdoc was like, you don't have to do this. Like, you could just get a job and leave, and then you wouldn't have to do this. You could just go on with the rest of your life. I'm like, no, I want my PhD, also drink. So there were many, many times. It was very hard. And then actually, my last year, University of Virginia had a very strict 7-year rule about how long you could be a graduate student. Notice I was there for 10 years. Every year I'd get a letter saying, you are now academically ineligible. You can no longer be a graduate student. And my advisor said, oh, yeah, don't worry. It's just one of those things. It's fine. I have money to pay for you. It's fine. So I got that my 6th year. I got that my 7th year. I got that my 8th year. I got that my 9th year. And then my 9th year, University of Virginia was like, we fucking mean business. So they killed my card. I couldn't go to the library. They took me out of the system, even though my advisor had money to pay for me. They couldn't. So I spent a year unemployed. I borrowed a lot of money in a lot of ways just so I could live and survive during that year. And then during that year, one of my family members in San Diego had a medical crisis. So I had to actually stop everything I was doing and go to San Diego to help out with that. And I remember thinking as we were coming out of that, I was like, okay, this is stable. Man, do I still want to do this? I don't know if I want to do this. I can't remember why. I guess I was like, at that point, I was so close. I was like, I should just get my degree. Maybe that'll help me get a job down the road. But yeah, no, it was super hard and challenging. I think I had, every year there was definitely a moment when I was like, this is totally not worth it. I liked the work. Like the playing in the lab was fun. But there was, there was a toxic guy, still a very distinguished professor at Jefferson Lab. No, not a professor, staff scientist at Jefferson Lab. And he was awful. I mean, he just drove people out of the program. I have close friends of mine who dropped out because of the interactions with this guy. And I tried to bring it up with my advisor once. And I, explained all this stuff. And my advisor was like, well, this guy, he's a really sweet man. He's never done those things to me. And he did nothing about it. So this guy, actually still a scientist at Jefferson Lab, he is somehow finally, after decades of abusing students and creating a toxic work environment, he's not allowed to formally advise students anymore. And I'm still very angry about this because I got to points many times interacting with this guy where I was like, you know what, I like doing the science, but I have to put up with it. And it's allowed, and the system rewards this behavior. I don't want to be a part of this. Again, my advisor talked me off the ledge and said, okay, well, why don't you move back to Charlottesville? Because I was at JLab at the time. And so you don't have to be around this guy. I'm like, okay. So that, that kind of worked out. And this guy is still there. He's still abusing students. Somehow it's okay. And people from that world are like, hey, Jaideep, do you want to come do JLab science? We need a laser guy. We need a laser guy for these experiments. And I always say, no, I am not going to send my student there if that guy is still working there. And they look at me like I'm a crazy person when I say that. I don't understand. I mean, JLab science is amazing. I would be perfectly happy dedicating my whole life and career doing that kind of science. The EIC is coming up. But, at that one place, there's that one guy that makes it so bad and he's allowed to thrive. And I'm not going to be a part of that. So I don't send my students there. And I'm very vocal about this. and no one seems to care. Sorry, I should end on a happy note. Science is fun, yay! Follow your dreams. Okay.
I care, and a lot of people care. Let's thank Jaideep. And with that, we officially finish today. Stay tuned for next month. I have no idea who it's going to be. Grab a book, grab snacks.
Okay,
Talk
grab
to
a book.
Jaideep if you want, and I will upload all of these things very soon to the web so that you can access it again. Thank you all for coming.